Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony A7 on the left and the Sony RX1 on the right. Now the A7 is part of the Alpha line, whereas the RX1 is the flagship of the Cybershot division. And Sony has restructured or rebranded their digital imaging business to now only be represented by the Alpha and Cybershot. So we're looking at the cream of the crop of Sony DI right now, at least until they update the balance of their full frame Alpha lineup, their larger bodied cameras. And really, this is all about portability. You know, the A7 being basically the culmination of what Sony was able to do with the RX1 and putting a full frame sensor, the same sensor found in the A99 flagship digital SLR that has now just come to the end of its life cycle, into a body that's reminiscent of the NEX lineup of cameras. Some things compromised, no electronic viewfinder built in. That's an optional accessory using the hot shoe at the top. You do have a built-in flash, and unfortunately, or fortunately for some, a fixed 35mm Carl Zeiss piece of glass built right into this camera. On the other hand, with the A7, you have the benefit of using the E-mount, which Sony has been pushing now for many years with the NEX brand, which has been dropped, as I mentioned, in favor of just being under the Alpha umbrella for all of their higher-end cameras, and I understand why they've done that. And the E-mount now accommodates full-frame lenses. So we've got FE lenses like the kit lens you see here, which is a 28 to 70 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6 lens, so really a traditional kit lens. This package will run you $2,000 retail here in the States, whereas the RX1 originally retailed for $27.99. You can now find this for a little bit less, but pricing hasn't become incredibly soft, and for good reason. The RX1 is still one of the most incredible photographic tools ever made, at least depending on who you speak to. So the reason I'm comparing these two is because they do offer very similar performance, and that's because even though the A7 has the capability of obviously swapping out lenses, the lineup is very limited right now. In fact, the 35mm f2 lens you get here with the RX1 is not on the roadmap currently for the A7 or A7R, or I should say the FE lens system for E-mount. The closest thing they've got, at least at launch right now, is a Zeiss 35mm f2.8. So already the RX1 staying relevant in that you're not going to match this lens sensor pairing with the A7. Now, the A7R does have that 36 megapixel sensor with the low pass filter omitted, so clearly a lot more resolution than you're going to find with the RX1, but that's not what today's review is about, because these are like in that they both have the same, pretty much the same 24 megapixel sensor that was in the A99. Key difference is that the A7 does have a new processing engine, different from what's found in the RX1. Menus also very, very similar. That's a big benefit that the RX1 had. Even though it's a Cybershot camera, it did not have a clunky menu that's found on many other Cybershot cameras. So at the price point, you were getting a tank, and the same can be said now for the A7. So what is this really a true comparison of? Well, clearly if you need interchangeable lenses, the A7 and A7R probably is the perfect camera for you if you're looking for a full frame mirrorless experience. In other words, full frame media format capability, quality in a camera that isn't much bigger than an APS-C sized sensor based model. And that's what the A7 delivers on. In my tests so far, it's not an incredibly fast camera, but when it comes to image detail and overall quality, you are getting almost professional quality out of a camera that, at least in terms of form factor, doesn't appear to be anywhere in that realm. Very similarly to what we get out of the RX1, which is just an imaging machine. No Wi-Fi or NFC here. This is just a camera, whereas we do have the niceties of more modern things like that built into the A7 and A7R, as well as better ergonomics, no question about it. But most of the dials, you may have noticed, are exactly the same. Mode dial identical. Shutter release actually a little bit higher quality. It's actually metal here on the RX1. Plastic, or at least it seems to be plastic on the A7. Not sure if that's the same on the A7R. Exposure compensation dial on both of them. but you are getting a much more robust grip, and you quite frankly need it on the A7 and A7R because some of these FE lenses, even some of the E-mount lenses like my Power Zoom 18-200, they are just a beast when it comes to attaching it to a small body. These are big lenses. In fact, some users have even had issues where, because the bodies are so lightweight, specifically NEX cameras, since the A7 just arrived, they were running into issues with basically screwing up the mount because of the weight distribution. You know, if you don't support it properly, you could actually damage it. Even though Sony never really, mentioned anything about that, trust me, that was a realistic issue. I mean, physics are relevant here, and weight distribution. But the A7 really is a beautiful piece of equipment, in my opinion. You're looking at something now that gives you the photographic capability that would once require something that would give you back problems, in a package that really is lightweight, trim, and yeah, it's much larger than the RX1 or an NEX 6 or 7, but the photographic quality, at least versus the NEX cameras, really is on an entire different plane. The electronic viewfinder, the same one found in the A99, a fantastic performer. I have to reiterate that the grip and the feel of this camera is just amazing. It's the same way I felt when I first used the NEX 7. It redefined my expectations for mirrorless cameras. Well, this has redefined my expectations for full frame mirrorless, since it's the first, but more importantly also the lightest and one of the best designed cameras I've ever seen. I mean, whether or not you like the actual aesthetics is a matter of personal preference, but the actual usability and comfort, I could see myself shooting with this all day without zero complaints. And so far in my use, I don't have any complaints, even though I haven't taken it out for a marathon run yet. But raw HDMI output for 4K, of course, 1080p video capture here in AVC HD. You've got that in 60p and 24p mode. The highest bit rate, though, is 24. Not sure why we took a step backwards there. I'll investigate that. But overall, a fantastic camera. Battery life, a little over 300 shots. And that Wi-Fi and NFC isn't just a gimmick. Once the application store gets running, it really is going to give you a whole host of features that you won't find on any other camera in this class. So a lot to like about what Sony's done here. It's not just about being lightweight and cute. It's really about raw performance and actually affordable, believe it or not, affordability, because to buy this sort of photographic capability on both still and video sides of things from any other manufacturer, which of course isn't delivered in this form, you'd be paying substantially more. Now, the lens lineup is limited. That is a drawback, but Sony has promised that through the course of 2014, they're basically going to dump a boatload of full E-mount lenses on us. So I'm not really concerned. They fulfilled most of their promises with the E-mount thus far, and since it's now the backbone of the Alpha brand, really, in my opinion, and where they think things are going, and they should be, because I really can't imagine anybody wanting to carry something heavier than this, because this is really now the right balance for some people who felt that the NEX 6 or 7 just wasn't weighty enough to give a quality feel. This really does deliver it, and of course, because the A7R is actually metallic in build, it'll do an even better job of delivering that quality kit feel that maybe you don't necessarily personally feel is here with the A7, depending on how spoiled you are. Now, the reason, as I mentioned before, I have it next to the RX1 is because I've already stated the RX1 has the exact same sensor pretty much that you're going to get in the A7, not as the A7R, of course. But when it comes to performance of that pairing of the sensor and lens, Sony worked with Carl Zeiss to actually basically build this camera from the ground up, in a sense. And when it comes to pocketability, this can really get in my pocket. There's no way this camera is making it into my pocket. Even if I stuck the 35mm Zeiss f2.8 lens on here, which is the smallest lens currently available. Yeah, you could go with an E-mount pancake, but to me, putting E-mount glass on here is somewhat of a backwards move. I mean, what are you buying a full-frame camera for if you're just going to start cropping images? You may as well stick with APS-C and not outbuy yourself in terms of bodies, because after all, bodies depreciate more than glass. But that's a tangent, going off topic. The point is that with this camera, you're never going to get it into your pocket. It's just a fact. Unless you have ginormous cargo pants, cargo pockets, it's not going to happen. This, on the other hand, really can make it. I know from personal experience, I have been able to fit it in a pocket, and you're still going to get professional quality results from a camera that no one is going to think is pro. Another big advantage this camera has, and I'm not just speaking out of my love for this camera, even though I think it's one of the best cameras ever made. The leaf shutter is completely silent. One of the biggest points of criticism with the new A7 and 7R, the fact that both of them have a pretty noisy shutter. Also want to point out that the actual speed between these two models, they're basically right on par with each other. 5 frames per second, continuous autofocus, that's what you're going to get out of both of them. So neither are speed demons. The A7R isn't either. You do have contrast and phase detection on here on the sensor. For quicker autofocus here, just contrast like the A7R. So that's a matter, again, of personal preference. Do you really see a tangible difference? I mean, you should. There's clearly a much more hands-on, not to be cute because it's not hands clearly, but a more technical approach, and really the professional standard for autofocusing in the industry is found here in the A7. But if you get more keepers out of this camera, I don't think I really need to say more. And the same applies to the A7R, even though it's missing the phase detection of autofocus, just contrast-based like this model. But size definitely in this model's advantage. It does not have an articulating screen, but basically the exact same screen you're getting with the A7 and A7R. But again, that A7 and A7R does have articulating capability. It doesn't flip around, but it will allow you to do a little bit more creative framing. Also, weather sealing here on the left, no weather sealing on the right. And that's one area where I think Sony kind of missed it on this, besides the actual physical ergonomics. I would have loved a real grip on here. Sad that I've got to look at third-party grips. I do also have the Sony Fit case for this, and that really doesn't provide the sort of grip I'm looking for. The grip I'm looking for is what we see right here, and that's why these bodies are virtually identical, except for the grip section, as you may have already noticed, and of course the viewfinder that's been slapped on top. Do I wish that Sony had put a viewfinder on the RX1? Sure, but you can buy the modular one. It is really expensive, but when you think about what you're getting, especially now comparing these two and the A7R, the RX1 starts to look like it is a pretty good value in my opinion, because you are getting that metal build. Yes, you are stuck with this 35mm Zeiss f2.8 glass, but if you could ever be stuck with any glass, this is the one to be stuck with, folks. Whereas here, with the A7, you're getting a really flexible device, all of the modern niceties, like I said, Wi-Fi, NFC, but the build isn't metallic. You have to step up to the $2,300 A7R, body only, no kit there, just to get a metallic build like we've got here with the RX1. So not that the actual build quality is necessarily going to be a make or break for many of you out there, but I think anyone who's spending this much on a camera, whether we're talking about $2,000 or $2,800, I think you should care about build quality. I think it is relevant. But really it comes down to, are you looking to take on the new FE lenses? If you are, if you have that budget and you're ready to spend thousands of dollars, then there's no question that the A7 and A7R are really, in my opinion, the best cameras on the market right now, especially since they're just launching on December 1st. But if you want something that's pocketable and is going to deliver the best image quality on the market, obviously the RX1R is another good option if you want to ditch the low-pass filter and resolution is your chief goal, even though you don't get a bump up in megapixels, which I think they should have done, but it's a nice option depending on what you prefer. The other advantage besides pocketability, of course, is that build quality and the fact that this lens has to be somewhere between a $1,200 and $1,500 piece of glass, no matter the lifespan of the actual camera itself. So while bodies do, of course, lose their value over time, and you can make the argument, well, here at least I can pair things up and the glass that I invest in will maintain its value, and here it's one whole package, you're right. Still, I think the RX1 has a niche that No one's matched, just like no one's matched the A7 or A7R. I'm not going to include Leica in this mix because they just aren't the same household name that Sony is, even though Sony isn't necessarily known for DI, digital imaging, the way they are starting to become. And they should be, because they are, I mean, they make Nikon sensors, enough said. I mean, all of you Nikon fans need to wake up. And I'm not knocking Nikon, but the reality is that if you're buying a Nikon camera, odds are Sony has made their sensor for them. And that's the case with the A7R and the Nikon D600. So basically, it really comes down to form factor. Do you need the interchangeable lenses? For me personally, as I mentioned before, I'm not looking to break out the bills, spend $2,000 or $3,000 now on FE lenses. But if I was, the A7 and A7R are dream machines when it comes to photographic tools, both for still and video. On the other hand, if you're like me and you've already got really competent cameras in your stable and you wanted a full frame device but didn't want the bulk, didn't want the list, that roadmap, because while many of you get excited about a roadmap, there are plenty of people that look at that roadmap and say, I don't want to think about spending $10,000, $5,000, whatever the number is. Well, that's what the RX1 satisfies. Yeah, you may have to buy that modular viewfinder, but I don't even think it's really necessary. I've reviewed it in bright sunlight. If you put on the sunny mode, weather mode on the screen, all of Sony's cameras are completely usable in bright sunlight. You will not get a washed out display like most manufacturers. So that's another important thing to point out. So right now, really liking both of these cameras. Of course, again, they're appealing to different users, even though they both have the same, pretty much same sensor, same build quality, even though this is metallic and this has weather sealing with polycarbonate, same button layout. The back of the cameras, I told you, one has an articulating display, the other does not. The grips are very similar, even though clearly on the A7, far more robust. The A7 has the SD card compartment on the right side of the body, whereas on the RX1 it's on the bottom, like most of Sony's cameras of days past. We've got more finger and thumb dials on the A7, and quite frankly we should, but then again we don't have the adjustability that we have, the quick fine-tuning right here that we have built into our lens, which for professional photographers and enthusiasts alike, I think is a great advantage for the RX1. Something I wish we had with this camera, but then again, no lens is soldered on, built in literally inside of the camera like it is here with the RX1, so you can't expect all of the controls to be on the lens. Other things to point out, I mentioned they both have the same hot shoe. The viewfinder here is great. I mean, it's the A99. You're going to get the same quality if you buy the modular viewfinder for the RX1. So it's not, the only compromise there is that you've got to worry about it getting knocked off or carrying it around separately. It's a little bit fragile, no question about it, but it is great in the fact that it can articulate. This is fixed. This is not going to move, but that's just another thing I wanted to point out. Battery life, very close, a little bit better with the A7 and A7R, and that's because of battery type. Quite frankly, the W series is going to outperform the battery that's found in all of the CyberShot models. They've got a one-size-fit-all approach to batteries, which I like, because that means if you own CyberShot cameras, you don't have 3 different battery types. But there's no question, would I love to be able to get a little more juice out of this? Sure. But I'm not looking to put a vertical grip on this. That's why the A7 exists. Now you've got a full-frame mirrorless compact that actually has a vertical grip. I mean, that's something the NEX brand couldn't live up to, couldn't mature to, and that's what we are now seeing here. The kit piece of glass is serviceable. I think for the average user looking to get their feet wet and pick this up instead of, Canon, Nikon, it's fine. But with time, you're definitely going to want to spend that money on glass, and that's where I'm going to continue to reiterate the great value here with the RX1, even though many people will interpret it as a dead end because out of the box, this is it. You can't do anything else. I mean, you can add a wireless SD card, you can add a flash, you can use the hot shoe to your heart's content, but that's about it. Final point, on the right side, we do have, much like on the A7, a microphone jack, no headphone jack for monitoring, a little more professional feature there, which it should be. This is a CyberShot, this is an Alpha. You also have micro USB for charging, and of course HDMI out. So very similar again in these feature sets, and because they have that same A99 full frame sensor and incredibly close, at least bodies, I had to compare these for all of you because I know for me personally, this is the struggle right now. Is the A7 offering, or excuse me, A7 or A7R offering enough to make me stop using my RX1 on a daily basis? And I'm not sure that it is, at least based on the current glass offerings. That could change with time, but another element that at least keeps me coming back to the RX1 is the fact that, as I mentioned before, just look at the size difference. Again, if I had the 35 millimeter Zeiss, maybe it would come out to about here, but the body still is just not comparable because of the built-in viewfinder, the grip, the extra thickness, which is because of Wi-Fi, NFC, and a whole bunch of other things being incorporated into this camera that just don't live inside the RX1. So I hope I covered just about everything for those of you like myself trying to figure out which is the better of the two for your uses, but it really comes down to, do you need the flexibility of the lenses, or do you care more about the pocketability? And the whole concept of the best camera is the one that you take with you, that goes everywhere, because this way you actually get your shot. But both will deliver almost 3D-like results, incredible depth of field, and really, especially when paired with Carl Zeiss optics, this is going to get very close, but never really achieve the exact quality that the RX1 or RX1R has. The A7R, on the other hand, that's another animal, and a whole nother beast to be tested. But hope this video helps those of you like myself in this predicament. Two great cameras, and the one thing I will say in closing, great to have these kinds of choices, especially from one manufacturer. I mean, look at the rest of the competition, and at least I tend to scratch my head. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.